Okay, good morning. It's good to see everybody here. I am incredibly honored yet again to have share the stage with famous Omar Hamoui, who is formerly the founder and CEO of AdMob, and now a partner at the awesome venture capital firm Sequoia Capital. Thank you, Omar, for joining us.
Thanks, Rich. Thanks for having me.
Well, I think as we're commenting in the back, many of you that have been around the mobile industry for a longer period of time are pretty familiar with some of the history of AdMob and what happened. But I thought some of you that may have joined the industry in the last 2 or 3 years might not. So I thought it might be helpful just to talk a little bit about the history of AdMob.
Well, every eye.
You really,
all right,
bathroom moments.
Yeah.
You really were at the very, very beginning of this industry when there really were feature phones and WAP technology, and there really were not smartphones at any scale outside of Symbian in Europe at the time. So I was wondering if you could just take us back to that period in 2005 and how you came up with the idea of AdMob originally.
Yep. And
how ultimately you had the guts to really quit business school, come out to California and do it.
Yeah, so actually I started AdMob while I was a first-year MBA student at Wharton. I had an entrepreneurial background before, so I was actually working on a number of mobile companies and mobile ideas before this. So the startup I was working on at Wharton was called PhotoChatter, and it was essentially a WAP-based photo sharing tool, and I just couldn't get it distributed. You had to get a carrier deal, there was really no way to advertise it, no way to distribute it, and so I thought there should be a self-serve way to run ads. I didn't know what an ad network was. I really didn't know much about the advertising industry at all. I was just looking for a solution to that problem, which in the WAP days was you couldn't get distribution for anything without a carrier deal.
And at the time, Google had what, if anything?
Google didn't have anything going on in mobile. I looked there first, obviously, for my own startup to run ads, and it wasn't available for mobile. So that led to the idea for AdMob, and I sort of switched off that idea and started working on AdMob. And a couple months later, I finished the initial version. And then it started working pretty well. I met some VCs, I ended up meeting Sequoia, thus building a relationship there, and after raising the Series A, I dropped out of school and started AdMob.
So you just moved across the country to Philadelphia with your wife and 2 young kids.
Yeah.
And then you made this move across and you said, we're going to move back.
Right.
And we're going to, with the 2 young kids in a small apartment in Philadelphia, move all the way back to California.
Yeah.
For the startup.
Right.
So what convinced you that the space was actually not uncrowded at the time, right? For those of you that were around, there was Screen Media, there was Flytext, there was NPocket, there was Rhythm's New Media. There's a range of players already working, sort of in the venture-backed. Themobi is another one.
Right.
Ad space. So what convinced you had a unique enough idea to make that change and convince your wife?
I mean, I think the first part was I didn't really know about many of those players. In fact, as I was raising money, people were like, have you heard of this company? And I'm like, nope. And have you heard of that company? And they're like, nope. I hadn't even really seen what was happening there because it wasn't really very obvious what they were doing. They were still primarily focused on bringing brand advertisers to the carrier deck. Yeah. And what I was doing was trying to bring little startups to other little startups, right, and to connect those people so they could advertise. And so even after learning about them and discovering more, it didn't really feel like a solution to the problem I had and to the problem I knew a lot of other mobile companies had. And so it wasn't really a huge issue. And then I think with the advent of the iPhone and then the rise of a lot more individual developers, it became more obvious that this was sort of a really good solution to that problem.
So talk a little bit about, if you would, the switch from the feature phone world to the smartphone world. There are a lot of discussions that you'd have with the board and others about what % of effort to emphasize on. It seems crazy now that this is even a debate at all, but at the time there was a debate about how much do you invest in the WAP or mobile browsing world versus native applications and smartphones. So talk a little about how obvious that shift was and then kind of what you see as the prognosis today.
Yeah, I think that, I remember those board conversations we had about that. So the thing was that at that point, there had been a lot of people. You would interact with people, and sometimes you meet people who were like mobile people, right? They had been doing it for 10 years, and they'd been waiting forever, and they saw that it was going to be big, but it just never got big. It never got to the point that they expected it to, even though it was pretty obvious that it should. And so when the iPhone came out, for me, it was just this is the phone we've been waiting for. This is what this is the actual device, the paradigm, whether it's this phone in particular, but the point is this is how it was supposed to be used, this is what we were all waiting for and what we expected it to be. And so we basically just you remember, we essentially dropped all of what we were doing, what we had built the whole business on, and shifted all of our energy in that direction. I mean, I literally told the company, like, I know this is a really tiny part of our business right now, but these two lines are going to cross, and when they cross, it's going to be, there's not even going to be comparable, so we just can't spend any more time on WAP anymore, even though at that point it was 90% of our business.
So if you put yourself today in the shoes of an entrepreneur that you might be coaching, and you're now on the other side of the conversation as a venture capitalist, how would you have them think about those platform choices today? I mean, the stats out there would suggest that Android is blowing up from a unit ship perspective, but then again, we kind of made that argument about feature phones back then, and it wasn't where most of the money was. iOS continues to perform, but is not growing, at least in unit share, as much. And there's an ongoing debate of does Microsoft ever become relevant again? Just talk through how you would coach an entrepreneur today about how to think about their investments, or some of what they call unit.
I think that it sort of depends on the stage of the company. I think that in the beginning, it really doesn't matter which one you choose. You should probably just probably pick one, I would say, and try and figure out how to get the user metrics and retention and all these other sort of important numbers to be in line. Because once you figure it out on one platform, frequently translates really nicely to the other. You have to obviously be on the iPhone and Android. I don't know about the other platforms. I would say though that probably the thing I didn't have to worry about being an ad network and working with lots of developers and being able to benefit from all their work was actually bringing a product to market that users are going to be engaged with. And so I think the platform really is the user base, right? That's the platform that you need to be able to build on. And that's tricky and hard and difficult. And I would be much more worried about that than iPhone or Android or Windows or whatever. Like that's less important.
Well, let's switch over to the topic of investing, sort of the next phase of what you're looking at. And you've done, in the last couple of years, as we've discussed, a little bit of angel investing. In addition to doing some investing, as I recall, even when you were at AdMob. So just curious, how do you think that is similar or different? The nature of, quote, doing angel investing versus doing it perhaps at an extremely successful, well-established VC firm. Do you think you look for similar characteristics for companies, or do you think the way you look for what's interesting to you now changes in some way?
I think that part of what drew me into the VC world was the angel investing. And I started out making small investments where I wasn't super involved. And that just wasn't very intriguing to me. So then I started making larger investments where I would try and take a board seat or get more involved. And that ended up being a little bit more fulfilling. What I found though there was that I was basically basing my decisions on pretty quick cursory glances at a company, not really thinking too deeply about it, and just figuring, that sounds good, here, let's go for it. And that kind of worked, but obviously that doesn't work within the context of a larger VC. I think that, for me though, the thing that's intriguing about it, obviously, is the ability to partner with a company and work with them, like on more than just here's some money, to actually partner with the company and work on them and trying to help them get to where they're going and achieve what they're thinking about. So that is compelling, and that's something that the VC Sequoia as well as Accel that I worked with did for me, and something that I feel like having a platform like Sequoia would help me do as well. You know what I mean? So it's really more of a partnership rather than an investment, as you know, and like being able to do that and help scale some of these companies is pretty intriguing.
So we all of us on the VC side of the world use the phrase often finding the great authentic entrepreneur. And oftentimes we've talked about you as a great example of that. How do you think you're going to find that great authentic entrepreneur that even though they might not have the quote years of experience, might not have studied the competitive map of mobile advertising before you started the company, obviously succeeded at an incredible level. What do you think is now that you've obviously been one of those folks, how do you think you will set your filter to search for that great entrepreneur crowd?
I mean, I think part of it is, I think there's a lot of just sort of face-to-face conversation and getting a sense of the person, what's really intriguing to them, what's interesting to them, and how passionate they are about what they're doing. I think for me, part of it also is just, it's weird. Like I've only been doing this for a few weeks, but today I was interacting with a company where the entrepreneur was in China, overseeing the production. They're trying to produce this particular product. He's overseeing the production line, and he really didn't have time to talk to VCs or care about what we were doing. So that actually seemed helpful to me. That like he actually is more interested in what he's doing than trying to like run up and down Sand Hill Road and have the perfect pitch deck. It's more like that's very nice what you're doing, but I've got to go actually do work.
So the person that won't talk to you is the person that will search out.
Pretty much like everything in life, right? And like that's how we all That's what we all want, is the people that are hard to get, I guess. But but the more important part was that, you know, just the focus and passion for what they're doing, and the belief that this is a person who can actually take this all the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I guess I'll just ask you one last question. Simply is, briefly for the folks that are probably going to try to find you after this conversation, what types of sectors do you think you're most interested in? Do you have sort of specific hypotheses, or do you think you're more going to look at in terms of great spaces and entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I think it's the latter. It's probably great spaces and entrepreneurs. I keep telling people, if I can understand it, it's probably something I'll be interested in. As I've looked at some companies, there's a lot of things that are sort of in, you know, the deep dark recesses of networking or hardware and other things that I don't get. So doesn't mean it's not a great idea. It's just like I don't understand. But there's plenty of other things that, you know, anything in the consumer space, mobile, I'm looking at a lot of Internet of Things type companies. Any of those I'm pretty interested in.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Omar. On behalf of any of us who had the opportunity to work with you at AdMob, thank you.
Cool.
And congratulations on everything you've done and all the great things I'm sure you're doing at Sequoia.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you all.